Feedback is one of the most powerful tools in a writer's toolkit. It can literally transform your work from beginner level to expert. But here's the thing. So many writers avoid feedback because they're terrified of hearing something negative, of being told they're doing it wrong. And that keeps them small. It holds them back from growing into the writer they are meant to be. That's why in today's episode, I want to completely reframe feedback. We'll break it down into the 4 main types you're likely to receive, and we'll talk about which kinds can leave you spinning your wheels and confused, and which ones are pure writing gold. By the end, you'll know exactly what to look for and ask for from your critique partners, developmental editor, or book coach, so that you can get the kind of feedback that actually helps you connect more deeply to your story and your readers. Hello, and welcome to the Speculative Fiction Writing Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Heather Davis. I'm a book coach, developmental editor, and fellow storyteller. And this is the show that's all about how to brainstorm, write, edit, publish, and sell a powerful speculative fiction novel. And maybe just change the world too. When writers come to me with their stories, they're usually scared. Scared of getting negative feedback. Scared that I'm going to confirm their deepest, darkest fear. That their story is terrible and that maybe they're not any good at writing after all. And I always feel such deep compassion and empathy in those first conversations because getting feedback on your creative work feels so vulnerable, so raw. Most of us have been writing since we were 7 or 8 years old, and our stories are these living, breathing extensions of our beliefs, our fears, our hopes, our dreams. And I remember being in their shoes. I still remember arriving at the digital doorstep of my first book coach, the brilliant Lisa Cron, manuscript in hand, secretly hoping that she would say it was the best thing that had ever graced her computer screen. But well, she didn't tell me that. Instead, she told me the truth. And the truth helped me grow into the writer I am today. I just wish someone had explained feedback to me back then, because if they had, I would have stopped being so afraid of it, and I wouldn't have cried so many tears. And I probably would have gotten a lot better at writing a whole lot faster. Okay, let's start with the idea of positive and negative feedback. I want to begin by saying I don't actually think those words capture what feedback really is. When we label feedback as positive or negative, we immediately attach emotion and judgment to it. Positive sounds good and negative sounds bad. And that kind of binary thinking can keep us stuck, afraid to engage with the very thing that could make us better writers. So instead of calling it positive and negative, I want to reframe those terms. Let's start thinking of positive feedback as praise feedback and negative feedback as growth feedback. Because that's what they truly are, 2 different types of information that serve 2 completely different purposes in your development as a writer. Let's unpack them one at a time. When we talk about praise feedback, what we're really talking about is someone saying, "I loved this," or "You did this part so well." It's the kind of feedback that highlights what's working beautifully in your story. And that feels amazing, right? It gives us that little dopamine rush, that validation that says, yes, I can write. Praise feedback reminds us of our strengths. It shows us what to keep doing, what to lean into. Now let's move on to growth feedback. This is what most writers, of course, label as negative feedback. But growth feedback isn't negative at all. It's simply someone pointing out that something isn't landing the way you intended. Maybe a beat is confusing or an emotion didn't quite come through. In other words, something that makes perfect sense in your head isn't fully transferring to their head. And that's incredibly valuable information because once you know what isn't translating, you can fix it and you can make the story even stronger. The problem is, most of us tie our self-worth to our writing. We are perfectionists. And when someone says, this part isn't working, our brains light up with panic. It triggers what I call the destructive inner monologue, or the DIM. It stirs up a fixed mindset that whispers, "You're terrible at this. You should probably just give up." But that's not the truth. If we reframe what we call negative feedback into growth feedback, suddenly it becomes an opportunity to learn, to expand, to level up our craft. Now, I have a lot more to say about praise feedback and growth feedback, but first I have to introduce you to the last two types of feedback so we can get a full picture of what we're talking about. Now that we've talked about praise and growth feedback, let's add two more dimensions: general feedback and specific feedback. General feedback is when someone gives you a big, vague statement without any concrete details. Something like, "I loved this chapter," or "I didn't like your protagonist." Those kinds of comments tell you how they felt, but not why, which means they aren't particularly helpful. Specific feedback, on the other hand, gives you the reason behind the reaction. It's the difference between "I loved this chapter" and "I loved this chapter because your descriptions of the mountains were so vivid and beautiful." Or between "I didn't like your protagonist" and "I didn't like your protagonist because he kept saying mean things to his best friend, but there wasn't enough interiority to help me understand why." So you can see general feedback leaves you guessing, while specific feedback gives you something to work with. Okay, now I want you to use that lovely imagination of yours for a second. Picture a vertical line. At the top of that line, write general feedback. At the bottom, write specific feedback. Got it? Now, imagine a horizontal line crossing through the vertical line. On the left side, write praise feedback. And on the right side, write growth feedback. And there you go. Just like that, you've created 4 quadrants, like the kind you used to see in math class. But don't panic. I promise I won't ask you to solve any math problems. If you are a visual person, and as I was just asking you to create these things in your mind, you're like, "Heather, I can't do that." I've actually made a graphic that I would love for you to go get. You'll find a link for it in the show notes, and you can grab it either now or later, whichever works better for you. Okay, let's get back to feedback. So here's what happens when we put all these ideas of all these different types of feedback together. If you look up at the top left quadrant of our imaginary chart, you will see general praise feedback. That's the kind of feedback you usually get from family members or from critique partners who aren't very experienced. It sounds like, "I loved your novel," or "the love interest in your novel was so fun to read about." Yeah, it feels great because, of course, it gives us that little dopamine hit, but it's actually not super helpful. Because while it tells you that someone enjoyed some aspect of your story, it doesn't tell you why. So you can't possibly try to bottle that magic up and recreate it later because you don't know what was causing the magic. Now, if we slide across our quadrants to the top right, we hit general growth feedback. This is the kind of feedback that might come from someone who's trying to be helpful but doesn't quite have the language for it yet. They'll say things like, "I didn't like your protagonist," or "the ending of your novel just isn't working." That kind of feedback can sting because it sounds critical, but it's not specific enough to guide you anywhere. If I got that, I wouldn't know where to start fixing my story. It would leave me feeling defeated and frustrated. Now let's go down to the bottom left quadrant. We will find specific praise feedback. Now we're getting somewhere. This is what you'll hear from experienced critique partners, editors, and book coaches. It sounds like, "I loved your protagonist because even when he was being cruel to his friend, you made it clear through his interiority that he felt deep remorse and that he was only really doing it because he was being blackmailed." That kind of feedback feels good, and it gives you the information you can use. You know what resonated with your reader, you know why it resonated, and you can deliberately try to do it again later. Finally, let's move to the bottom right corner of our little chart. What I like to consider the holy grail of feedback, specific growth feedback. This is the kind of feedback that will change your writing life. It sounds like this. Right after this line of dialogue, I would love to see you add a bit more interiority so we can understand how your protagonist is processing this moment. What are they thinking? What memories does this stir up? That is gold. It tells you exactly what's missing, and it gives you direction to make your story stronger, deeper, and more emotionally resonant. So yes, you heard me right. The most valuable kind of feedback you can get is specific growth feedback. The kind that most of us call negative feedback, because that's the stuff that helps you grow. Let me give you a quick story to show you what I mean. I recently started working with a new client. She'll remain nameless, of course, but after I went through her manuscript, I gave her loads of specific growth feedback, and she came to our meeting full of questions. Then she went back, she analyzed her own work, and she revised based on that feedback. And when I read her pages the next time, it was like an entirely different writer had taken over. Her story had come alive, all because she got the kind of feedback that showed her exactly where to grow, and she wasn't afraid to dig in and do it. And honestly, the same thing happens to me with my own book coach. Yes, I am a book coach and I have a book coach. That's exactly how much I believe in what I do, because no writer can see what they can't see, if you know what I mean. Anyway, when I get notes from my book coach, I skim that specific praise feedback first, and it feels so good, right? But what I'm really hunting for is the specific growth feedback, because that's where the breakthroughs happen. Every time I tackle those notes, I can feel my writing getting sharper, my story getting stronger, and my confidence building. That's the power of learning to love the kind of feedback that helps you grow. Okay, my friends, that's it for today. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you'd like a copy of that feedback graphic, just click in the link in the show notes and join my email list. I'll send it straight to your inbox so you can keep it handy for the next time you're getting or giving feedback. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share the Speculative Fiction Writing Made Simple podcast with a writer friend, or 2 or 3. It's one of the best ways to help the podcast grow and reach more writers who need a little clarity and encouragement on their writing journey. Until next time, keep writing, keep dreaming, and remember, the world needs your stories right now. So don't you dare give up on your novel or yourself. Talk to you next time.